Hello, hello. All right. So
Hello.
I'm here with Christopher Rutledge. Welcome to the spooky Halloween stream. It's spooky because I'll be learning new things today, and learning can be scary. It's also scary because there's a stranger in the studio today, Christopher Rutledge, who is a CG artist and filmmaker, known for being a Houdini wizard and making floppy animated characters. You might have seen his work on Adult Swim.
Yeah.
Make sure to check out the description. There's a link with his work, so you can check that out. And thanks for joining us today. People might think we're talking about the magician that is named Houdini, but can you explain what we're actually talking about today, Chris?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about, hi everyone, and thank you for the intro. And also here is my website, christophers.website, conveniently easy to find, but also in the description, as Joey mentioned. But yeah, so I'm a CG artist. I started off in my 3D journey back in around like 2014 or I think 2015. So I started off originally learning like a whole bunch of different 3D programs. I remember opening Blender when I was like 13 or something, and it was really scary back then. And so I didn't end up learning it. And then at some point I tried like 3ds Max, and I kind of liked that, but I didn't have a Windows computer, so I couldn't easily use it. I tried Maya at some point and it was really scary. Eventually I got into like Cinema 4D, and it seemed like that was like the fun, easy to learn intro 3D program that was good for people that were afraid of 3D.
Right.
So, and for a while I was learning that, and I was recommending that to people who wanted to learn 3D. And then I went to school for 3D, and I started learning Maya in school. I got pretty good with Maya. You know, I liked C4D also, but I had a professor in school that was telling me about how he was learning this program called Houdini, and that it was like this crazy program used in the industry for all kinds of crazy effects and simulations and kind of all that stuff. And that if you could learn it, you could get a job anywhere and you could make tons of money. And it was like, you know, like, but it was really, really hard to learn, and it was really scary. And I think back then it was a little bit harder to learn and a little bit scarier. But also right around then, there was all these tutorials coming out for it. And I realized like, well, there's tutorials for this thing. I could probably learn it. Like, you know, how hard could it be? I've learned these other 3D programs, sort of whatever. And I started diving into it and was really enjoying it. I you know, sort of having a lot of fun with the simulations and everything in there. But I always liked making this weird kind of character stuff. And I think a cool thing about Houdini is it's a nice program to learn if you know another 3D program. In fact, I think most people haven't even heard of Houdini unless they've already started learning 3D, and then they end up hearing about it somehow from other people. Like usually before people learn 3D, they're hearing about C4D or Maya or Blender as like the ones to learn.
That's true.
But Houdini is a really good sort of supplementary one to learn on top of that, because it's so good for all these sort of simulations and particle stuff and whatever. So you can learn a little bit of Houdini and then bring that stuff into Maya or C4D or Blender or whatever.
Which is what we have on the screen right now. Is I brought this over from, I exported it from Blender, and right before the stream, Chris brought it into Houdini and got it set up in a minute. So, yeah. So
what we could totally do in here is like, you know, do some crazy procedural animation on our rig here, or we could, you know, add a fluid simulation and then bring that back into Blender, you know, and back in the day, that's what I was doing. But eventually I was like liking Houdini more and more. And I feel like now we're in this kind of interesting place where Cinema 4D is no longer the program that people should go to if they want to learn 3D. Like it's very obviously now Blender. Like, it's a no-brainer. It's free. There's so many tutorials out there. It's gotten so good.
The community is massive.
And I think it's like pretty obvious if you are like pretty aware of the ecosystem of 3D programs that like the good programs now are Houdini and Blender. And, you know, all the other ones are kind of owned by companies that are not really that interested in like making their customers happy or, you know, fixing bugs and like making the tools like nice to use. They're really more interested in their shareholders and milking as much money as possible out of the customers. Whereas Blender obviously is this cool open source project. And then, you know, Houdini, on the other hand, is just owned by mainly one dude, Kim Davidson, who is one of the founders of the company. And they don't make a bunch of CAD stuff and, you know, other programs. Like they just make Houdini, really. So they really care about this program. They really care about the people that use it. And, you know, year after year, you'll see the Houdini updates, you'll see the Blender updates. You'll be like, they're both killing it, and they've both been killing it for years. and then you'll see like the updates to C4D or Maya or whatever, and it's like a couple of like deformers or like some little like a new CAD importing feature or like some boring thing like that.
Nothing substantial.
So nothing substantial. So it's like, anyway, I think Houdini and Blender are both really, really awesome.
Yeah.
I want to learn more Blender, but I also know that I love Houdini and I want to stay in here. And I'm glad that I see that it's improving in all the ways that I want to see it improved. And I think more people should check it out and learn it. And I would love to see more Blender people mess with it as well. And I think there's a lot of potential for like cool pipelines in the future that utilize like both Houdini and Blender together.
Especially if you already know geometry nodes a little bit or even shader nodes. I think Houdini is not going to be nearly as intimidating. And there's also a free version. I didn't pay for Houdini to try it out today. So you can go download it right now if you really want to try it out. Exactly.
Yeah, there's Houdini Apprentice, which is like a totally free version. There's no downsides to using it. And if you later want to pay the money to upgrade to like a proper version, that would probably be Houdini Indie that you'd want to upgrade to.
Yeah, which isn't too expensive like for the year, right?
Yeah, it's only like $250 or something like that for a year. I think $400 if you buy 2 years. And it has the only rule is basically like you're not supposed to use it if you're like a big studio. Like if you're making less than, I think they say 100K per year, you can use it commercially for whatever you want. And you can use it's got no limitations. Like it's not limited in any way versus like the full proper studio version. Like the studio version costs like a couple grand a year instead. So it's a lot more expensive.
But at that point you'd be like making over 100,000 a year and could afford it.
Also more importantly, it's like at that point you're probably working for a big studio that is then paying for the license for you.
Exactly.
So you don't have to worry about it. You just have the indie for your home use or whatever if you want that, or you just get away with using Apprentice. Now if you save this file that we make, it will save it as this HIP NC, this non-commercial version, which means that if you were to open it in like a proper version like indie or whatever, that it would downgrade the session to an Apprentice version where you can't render past like 720p or whatever.
Okay.
But there's an online converter that's free to use that you can just Google like Houdini Apprentice converter and it will convert it to Indie for free.
Okay.
And so if you decide later to upgrade to Indie, there's not really any penalty for having used Apprentice. It's like just use Apprentice until you know that you want to actually pay for it and you're actually going to use it, then start using Indie. But yeah, anyway, we should dive into this stuff.
And just so you know, Chris is controlling my mouse, so we can both be using the screen at the same time, just so everybody is aware of that.
Exactly, yeah. And I'll try to not be super annoying with that, but we'll see.
Okay.
So cool. All right. So this is, maybe we should save this guy and make a new document totally from scratch just so that people can follow along. And I will save this again to that folder and I'll just call it demo part 2. So now we're in a blank Houdini session here. And this is what we're greeted with. Not insanely different from any other 3D program.
No, we got the viewport with some tools on the left. It looks like some other maybe like modes at the top, kind of like Blender. We got like modify, model, polygon, deform, stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of very similar ideas. Now, the big thing with Houdini, though, that you sort of hinted at, is that it is pretty much the whole program is like very node based and procedural. So it's kind of like if the whole program was built from scratch with like this geometry nodes idea in mind.
I'm excited.
So if you like geometry nodes, you're going to love Houdini. So to start off, this is basically, we have the viewport here. The navigating by default is different from Blender. It's more similar to other 3D programs. So, I mean, you can try seeing if you can get a hang of it, but it's basically
middle click to pan. Okay. Left click.
It's like,
and then right click zoom. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Middle.
It'll take a minute, but it doesn't seem that different really.
Yeah. It's not too different. I think Blender, it uses like the shift key and Houdini uses the alt key instead or something like that. But like it's in this case, it's Blender. That's the weird program where they're the ones that like have the whole. So
this is probably Y up also.
It is Y up. Exactly. You can see in the bottom left corner here, we have the little gnomon that always sort of like orients to show, where you are rotationally in world space. But so we have that. And then over here, in this box here, this is our node network. So this is where we can start dropping nodes and stuff. So you can go over there and press tab, and I'll let you do it, Joey.
Okay.
And then type in like sphere or something. Yeah,
Okay,
do a
so we
sphere
got
polygons.
Polygon. There we go.
Click that. Now you got a sphere there. And now you'll see right above that, we have the parameters window where you have, translate, rotate, scale, all that kind of stuff that you would sort of expect. And you kind of, know how all this stuff works.
Yeah. So like in Blender, it would kind of be like all of this stuff is just on the node itself. But instead, when you select the node, you get more options up here. I think it's similar in like DaVinci Resolve in like the Fusion panel. It's kind of the same idea.
Yeah, it's definitely a similar idea where it's like, you're selecting. Yeah, it's not the sliders and stuff that are on the node itself, but rather, in this parameters that like are associated with the node. So anyway, we have this. We can add this in this sort of context that we're in. We're in this objects context.
Yeah.
I think the most similar comparison to Blender is where like if you compare it to in Blender, you have like, I guess like object mode and then you have like edit mode and stuff.
Yeah, right.
And so we're in that kind of object mode and we can make a bunch of different objects here. We can make a rubber toy. I can move that around. There's all these pieces of, there's a bunch of test geometries that Houdini comes with, which are really good for
pig.
Like, if the pig is a classic, is a cool one. And he's got like an animation that comes with him.
Oh, sick. Okay. So you can test like animated things. Yeah. That's neat. Yeah,
you can test all kinds of stuff with this stuff, and it's great. And so what we're doing is we're making all these nodes, and they're not like connected in any way. There's nothing really like procedural happening up here. It's just like these are all different kind of like containers or like folders.
Yep.
And if we double click in any of them,
so then
we get into the
geometry level
mode.
Yeah,
exactly. So you can see up here, this word changes from objects to geometry. So now we're in this geometry context. This is where you're going to be like 90+% of the time in Houdini is this geometry context. You'll hear nerdy Houdini people refer to this context as SOPs.
Yeah.
So there's this like
I've
weird,
heard of
annoying
this, like what Houdini, is it? Surface operators? Is that what it is?
That is what I believe it's supposed to stand for. There's this weird nerdy Houdini lingo for all these different contexts where we have like, there's like object level and then there's like SOPs, DOPs, shop,
flops,
top. Yeah. Like all these different ops. COPS is the compositing operators. There's like all this different stuff.
Got COPS and Houdini. My goodness.
We got COPS. Yeah. We can make a COP network here. Dive into here and then
to get arrested.
Exactly. I can make a file node and it will make this like cool butterfly. And then I can do like a distort by slope. And I think I can make like a noise, a fractal noise and plug this in to be like the height that's going to kind of distort this thing. And then I plug this in here and plug this in the source, and then I get this cool, weird, like noise distorted thing, and you can see all the different
processing, like after you render type stuff.
Exactly, right. Or like how you have the viewport compositor in Blender. You have the same thing. It's called slap comp in Houdini, where you can live do all this stuff on top of everything, which is really cool. So you can change like how much it's like distorting your thing or the element size. And anyway, this is just one of the many cool parts of Houdini. We shouldn't get too into COPS, but COPS is there and you can do cool stuff with it. But again, we mainly want to focus on SOPs. So we're in SOPs now. And what you'll see is that unlike at object level, now instead of being able to have, by clicking these blue, what we call them as display flags, you can like turn on and off objects or whatever. But at geometry level, you really just have one thing display flagged. So if we display flag this, it turns it off on this one.
Okay.
Right.
So if you wanted multiple things displayed, would you like join them at
you would either
like the object level?
Merge them.
Okay.
So we could merge them here, right? I want to have both of these and we'll see. Yeah. Now we have them together. Or you could have them exist at the object level in different objects. So I could copy this. I could make a new geo container, paste this in here, and now they both exist at the same time. And this has its own
interesting
sort of object level world transforms and all that kind of stuff. Right. And the one other nice thing at object level is that you can up here make like lights and stuff if you want to be able to like kind of have some nice viewport lighting to work with. And I could make like, I might make like a grid ground plane on here, and I can turn on this high quality lighting setting up here. So it looks a little bit nicer. Again, it's not going to look quite like, I think they're working on making a sort of what they're calling a cinematic viewport, which should be kind of the same idea as what EV is, but it still is not, that's definitely one of the very unique things I think about Blender is how it has EV and how that's like a real sort of like superpower of Blender for the time being. But I'm excited for Houdini to get there eventually, and I'm glad that they're at least working on that. So I don't think any of the other programs are really working on that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're back in SOPs now. I just double clicked on this geometry. I'm gonna also note that in the viewport up here, I can show all objects if I want, or hide other objects so we just see this one.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Ghost. That's cool.
I'll hide this one for now, and then we'll start doing some real geo nodes type stuff.
So you could do like some sort of like displace or deform, and then like plug some noise in to make it all wobbly if you wanted to.
So what I'll do is let's use a mountain node. And what this is going to do is basically do what you're saying all in one node, where it's using a noise.
Right.
This is actually just a variant of this other node called the attribute noise. You can see the actual name of the node here is attribute. But there's a shortcut for it called mountain that creates an attribute noise that basically pushes the points out along their normal vector. And you can tweak the amplitude of that. I could add in here a subdivide node right beforehand so we get more detail, and get a cool.
Yeah, I'm assuming this is for like if you throw it on a plane, then you can get some like mountain shapes easily or something like that.
Yeah. I think that's the idea of like where the name comes from and stuff. But it's just a known shortcut kind of that like mountain node is how you make a noisy, like normal displacement type thing. So that's cool. That's one thing that we can do. And there's so much kind of cool stuff you can do with this sort of idea in Houdini. We have a really nice thing called, you're familiar with VDBs, I think.
Yeah, like volume. It's like a volume file type, right?
Yeah, so I can do a VDB from polygons over here. That will do is convert my polygons into a VDB, which is basically, if anybody's not familiar, the idea is it's kind of like you're, instead of using polygons to represent your surface or your geometry,
like a point cloud.
We're using what it really is it's voxels.
Okay.
So it's like 3D pixels basically. And so you can think of like polygons as like the equivalent of like vector-based program, like, Adobe Illustrator or Flash or Adobe Animate. And then, like these sort of voxels.
Yeah, it's like raster, like Photoshop.
It's like raster. Yeah, exactly. So I can change the voxel size and make them more fine and detailed and stuff. And you can do really interesting things with voxels. So like if I make like a box over here, for example, I can do a VDB from polygons on this box also. And then I can do something like a SDF difference, or no, SDF subtract.
So this is like some Boolean stuff.
It's Boolean stuff, except the thing about voxels is they're much better for doing type
definitely
stuff. I can put
because you're basically just like deleting some of the points, some of those inside.
Instead of having to figure out how to change the topology to make it work or whatever, right? So like I can move this around now and make this cool sort of like voxel thing. And then after you do all this, you can do a convert VDB to convert it back to. So then it's like
a polygon, or what do you call that? Like a voxel remesh type thing.
Yeah, exactly. Now there's also in Houdini, there's this, what this type of remeshing is called is I believe it's called like this marching cubes algorithm. That it uses to quickly remesh surfaces like this. But if you wanted like a triangulated one, we could do like a remesh node, and that will make a triangulated version. Now the target size is too big here, so I'll lower this down to like 0.025, and now we have a nice remeshed version like that. But there's also something for like a game engine potentially, or for like a Softbody simulation. So if we wanted, we could do like a configure a. Actually, let me transform this guy. Yeah. So I'll move him up here, or her rather. And I'll do a Vellum configure tetrahedral softbody. So this will set up what I need to do like a softbody type sim. First, I'm tetrahedral on this mesh, and I can explain that in a second. But basically, instead of it just being surface polygons, it's made of this sort of,
there's like an internal structure or something.
There's an internal structure, so it's made up of these tetrahedrons, like little pyramids, basically.
Yeah. Cool.
And so with that, it can create kind of constraints between all those tetrahedrons in here, and I can make a Vellum solver. And
so vellum is like soft body, or is it like cloth? What do you say it's?
Yeah, vellum is basically, it's called XPBD is the sort of toolkit, but really what it is the way to think of it is it's for doing any kind of cloth, soft body, grain.
Oh, okay.
You know, like you can even do some kind of fluid type effects with it and stuff, and they can all interact. So it's this really cool solver that can handle a lot of different things. I'll turn on this ground plane here, and it already has gravity built into it on the forces up here. And I'll also hit this button over here. This is the real-time toggle.
Okay,
so if I don't hit this and I hit play, it'll just play back as fast as it can.
Mm-hmm.
And this runs on the GPU, so it takes a second to cook the first frame.
Whoa!
But then you get this nice little sim of this weird.
That's like definitely very fast compared to Blender's like default soft body.
Yeah. And it can be even faster. Actually, we can make it even more optimized for the GPU. So yeah, so you can see if I play this, it plays back like really, really fast now because this is all
like,
saved in RAM.
Yeah, it's like cached or whatever.
But if I hit the real time toggle, now it'll play at 24 FPS. So it won't exceed that, right? It'll play at a maximum of 24 FPS.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. But also, they did add this one cool new feature recently where if you change it from full to this minimal mode, which is mainly meant for grains and fluid, it should actually run even faster. And it will take a second, but it should be, and I think you can ignore the warning. It takes a second to compile it with OpenCL so it can like fully run on the GPU. But once it compiles that, which it should only have to do once, it should like actually sim real time pretty fast, or not like exactly real time, but like close to real time. So I'll give it a second. And yeah, maybe this is faster. I'm not sure. Again, it's more so meant for like grains and fluid. And I made a tutorial about this on my channel, but you know, you can get this stuff to go really fast. You can also,
that's sick.
if we were to like lower the constraint iterations, which maybe we could even lower it to like 1 or something, it'll go really fast.
Yeah, it's like
but
a
it's
balloon.
like, then it's not able to like,
there's not as much
the stiffness of the constraints as much.
It's like there's not as much inner structure. Maybe is that what it's doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's only doing one iteration per substep of like maintaining the constraints. So you're not giving it enough sort of power to sort of like if it maintained the stiffness properly, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It takes a while to kind of like, you know, wrap your head around exactly how and getting the intuition for how all this stuff works, but it does work pretty well. So like 10 is even actually maybe enough for this, and it's a very quick floppy sim, and you know, that's a fun little thing. That's cool. Another thing though I was going to show up here is that we can do they have a built-in quad remesher.
Yeah, quad remesher is great.
Which is not the same as that Exoside quad remesher that I know you can get a plugin for.
One or something.
It's a built-in Houdini one that's free with the program, which is great, and it works really, really fast. But it's not as high quality yet. They're still calling this beta. You can see it says quad remesh beta.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll get as good as the Exoside quad remesher. But also, if you go up here, there's a tab called, I believe it's called Side Effects Labs.
Okay.
And you could hit Update Toolset, and you can install these extra tools that come with Houdini called Side Effects Labs.
All right, cool. It's like add-ons.
And so I think plugins. you can see over here, it's like it lets you install Side Effects Labs, daily build, install, and then you'll need to let it like do that and stuff. But it's just like a bunch of extra tools that you can get for Houdini, made by this team at Side Effects called the Labs team. Yeah, and they're really cool. And they make a lot of awesome handy tools, like you know, like a auto UV tool and like other things like that.
It looks like you can. So can you move those control points that are being used for the remeshing? Yeah, for the remesh.
There's some way to control the way that it goes about remeshing this stuff. Yeah. I haven't looked into it that much, and I'm still honestly mostly using the Exoside quad remesher because I think it's just higher quality. But in a pinch, it's nice to know that this is here.
Yeah, definitely.
So anyway, we got that. We got these different modes for remeshing. That's all cool. Another thing though is that if we go back to the SDF, you know, which is a type of volume. So there's like two different kinds of volumes. There's like fog volumes, which is what you would use for like clouds and stuff. Yeah. So if I go over here and I make a different one, I'll call this like fog. I can, instead of making a distance VDB that's like called surface, I'll make a fog VDB called density.
Yes.
And then we get this fog VDB type instead. So every, you know, 3D pixel or voxel on here is its own like measurement of density. So like, you know, the the values for each of these may be like 0.1 or inside it might be 1 or outside it will be 0. Whereas the way that these work instead, these SDFs, is that for every point, it's telling you how far it is from the surface. Right. So if it's on the surface, its value is 0. If it's outside of the surface, its value is, I think, positive. And if it's inside the surface, its value is negative. Yeah. So it's kind of like Minesweeper. I think it's like telling you like how far away it is from
It's just checking the difference or the distance to the surface, basically.
Exactly. It's measuring it. So that's good for representing surfaces. But if you want to do clouds and stuff, you want to use fog type sort of SDFs and volumes and stuff.
Yeah, Blender definitely has similar stuff going on for fog.
Definitely. Yeah. But this is something that Houdini is really, really good for. And I also made a whole video about volumes and VDBs and all this stuff that kind of explains all this stuff in more detail that people can check out if they're curious.
Yeah. Chris also has stuff on Patreon. So if you want to check that out, get some extra videos.
Oh yeah. But most of it is free on YouTube. On my YouTube. Yeah. Anyway, so another thing that you can do with volumes that's really nice is we can use a thing called a smooth.
Okay, cool.
So I can just smooth out everything, kind of blurring all the distance VDB stuff going on here. Yeah.
If you were to do that in geometry nodes, it's just called like a smooth or a blur attribute node. Yeah.
Right. And I could do that without SDFs. Like I could over here, just there's also a node called blur.
Oh, okay.
And this will blur the position of all the connected points.
Oh, yeah. So it's doing a similar thing. Yeah.
It's doing a similar thing, but with polygons instead of with SDFs. So it's really useful to have this sort of control with SDFs, and SDFs are really good at this kind of stuff. Another thing you can do is a reshape. So I can either dilate or I can erode.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
The SDF.
Yeah.
And that's cool because like, you know, if I want to erode it a lot, like it will disappear and die. Whereas like if I were to like try to smooth this into oblivion, like it's gonna just like the polygons still exist. They're trying to figure out where to go, and you're getting these weird artifacts and stuff.
But with the
that's cool.
With VDBs, you could actually just like push it, erode it to the point where it's like multiple different sections. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. So let me show you really quick how to make like a cool little like animation with this stuff.
Sure.
So we have the mountain node that we learned about, and you know, I think one thing that I like to ask when I'm like teaching a class to people is like for them to try to come up with like a answer for the question, like how would you define like what a simulation is? I'm curious what your answer would be. I feel like you probably have a good grasp on what it is, but I have an interesting, I think, like interpretation of it. That I think will make a lot of sense. But
I mean, I guess it would depend on what type of simulation, but I think in general, it's just like calculating movement over time with some sort of restrictions or constraints. So if it was like just particle simulation, then you would have a bunch of particles, tell them to move based on just like an initial velocity or some type of noise or thing, and then have other types of restrictions like maybe dampening from like wind resistance, or if it like is close to another object, you could like do some sort of maybe like ray casting or distance to the object to check to see if it's moving past it. Yeah, I guess like more like kind of just what I said at the beginning, just like
totally
movement over time, adding restrictions.
So then I guess my response to that would be like, well, then would you call something like this a simulation? Right? If I'm like keyframing this from here to here, it's like that could be sort of like maybe something that someone thinks of as like a particle simulation, right? Client certainly would tell me like, hey, can you do a particle simulation like this?
I guess the difference between what you're doing there is that like with a simulation, each frame or like subframe or whatever is like updated like independently or based on its previous thing. So it's like instead of it just being on a slider like that, you would have to check each frame to see like where is it now? Okay, where is it now?
Exactly.
Like that
exactly.
Sort of
so you got it exactly. So you're incredibly close to the answer that I tend to give people, which is that basically, you know, this is just a series of rules here, right? And if I jump to frame 48 or 109, I can say exactly what this is going to look like, and you know, we don't need to know what is on the previous frame. Whereas a simulation is a series of like procedural rules or whatever that are running recursively every frame.
Yeah.
So I can do that. And I think you have a similar thing in Blender called like simulation nodes or something.
Yeah. Simulation zone.
There's a thing in Houdini called the solver.
Mhm.
So what this does is it basically, if I double click into this, it gives me this setup where I can run sort of stuff like recursively every frame.
Mhm.
So it'll like do whatever I do in here, go out and then come back in and then run again.
Mhm.
So if I use like a mountain node in here, for example, and then I go out of here and I let this play, you know, it'll
So it's
explode like this.
Changing the normal direction will change on each frame. So then
Yes.
the next time around, it's going to like push it in a slightly different direction.
Yeah. So this on its own right here isn't that interesting, but you can keep in mind that we also have, I think I can go for a little bit less. I can make the amplitude smaller here, but also we could remesh this every frame.
Oh, damn.
Like we were, right? So then you won't like run out of polygons.
Yeah.
You know,
It's going to be some like fungal growth or something.
Yeah. So if I play this now, you end up with this crazy kind of fungal growth type stuff. It's going to get really slow though, because it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, because it's like adding faces each step, basically.
Exactly. This is easier to do actually with VDBs. So if we do it's a VDB from polygons in here. I can set the voxel size again to like 0.025 or whatever, and then convert VDB to polygons again.
Okay.
And then now if we play this, I think it'll be faster. Yeah, there we go. Now we get this crazy growth situation here.
And that like the points when they like fold back in on each other, they just start merging too.
They just merge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They combine. I could even add a VDB smooth in the middle, right? If we wanted to like smooth it out every frame as well, so it doesn't get noisy, and then maybe like it'll kind of erase parts or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But there's like a lot of really cool stuff you can do with this kind of thing. And it's cool because like, anything you can build here, any series of rules, any procedural setup or whatever, you can run recursively every frame in a solver and end up making really cool stuff. So I just made a video on Patreon actually, where I did a thing where I was like pushing stuff out along the normals, but I was doing it with ambient occlusion, sort of driving.
Oh, that's crazy that you can do that. It's like mixing shader stuff.
Yeah. And you can show it as an example in a second. But
yeah, sure.
Anyway, there's all kinds of crazy cool growth stuff that you can do.
Yeah, that looks awesome.
And that's a lot of fun.
So you could probably do some like cool erosion too, I bet, with VDBs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like the smoothing or the VDB reshape node that we looked at that has that dilate and that erode sort of feature. Like it'll eat away at it every frame this way, and then it will sort of grow, but also like parts of it will delete. And then
that's cool.
Now, also the noise is like static, like it's not changing every frame. So like you'll end up with like bits that are kind of stuck.
So you could like change the seed or something like that if there is one.
Yeah, we could change the seed, or we could just click this turn animation on box and then see what that ends up doing. And so that's too much erosion, I guess. Let's turn off the erosion here. And so that's another useful thing is you can bypass nodes. And this is like in a lot of programs,
but mute or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So you hit play on that, and then you get a weird wobbly kind of growth thing, amoeba type shit.
Yeah, that's cool.
And this is fun. And then let's say
zero liquid.
Kind of, yeah.
I mean, not actually, but that's what it looks like.
At some point, get into how to make that kind of stuff as well, which is super fun. I mean, doing flip fluid simulations in Houdini is really, really fun. But yeah, so this is cool. And then so I'll show really quickly, just because I know that there's a lot of Blender people watching. They'll probably want to know, like, well, if I'm doing this stuff in Houdini, how would I bring this back into Blender?
Yeah.
You know, I saw somebody in the chat asking if I do shaders and everything in Houdini, and the answer for me is, yeah, I do it all in Houdini. I love doing lighting and rendering in Houdini. It has its own built-in render engine called Karma and all this stuff that works super well. But also, I know that there's a lot of people that love bringing stuff that they make in Houdini into Blender and rendering it with cycles or Eevee. So if we want to do that with something like this, where it's animated, but it's not using bones, and there's not like a changing kind of like point count, or there's a changing point count per frame. And, you know, like I want to export the animation somehow, you would want to use Alembic. Yeah. So what I'm going to use is this node called Alembic Output. Okay. It's called ROP Alembic Output. So is like rendering operators or something
Okay,
like that.
yeah.
So the nodes that are meant for outputting stuff are usually called ROPs.
Yeah.
We can set a frame range here. I can set it to, let's just export to frame 28. And I'll hit save to disk. And then it doesn't let me export because
free version, right?
Yes.
Okay.
However, this should work fine if we're using Houdini Indie, even though it says here it's only supported in Core and FX versions. I think that's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I'll probably end up getting Houdini Indie soon, I imagine.
You might be able to do USD export.
I don't know the limitations with USD, what it can export. But I know for people wondering...
USD can certainly do this kind of stuff.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for people wondering if you can use Alembic with Blender, you definitely can. You can export and import Alembic. It's good for like if you do like a cloth simulation in one file and you want to bring it into another. I actually helped somebody like the other week figure out how to put a cloth animation, a cloth simulation on twos, so it has a sort of like stepped interpolation type thing going on, and we just used Alembic for that, and it worked great.
Yeah, Jason Harmon, who's an amazing Houdini artist in the chat, who also has really awesome tutorials on his YouTube channel, says that Indie will definitely export Alembics.
Yeah.
But I also exported this USD. However, it saved it as a USD NC, which I'm assuming means non-commercial.
Non-commercial, yeah.
I don't know if that means that it will only open in Houdini and it won't open in like Blender or whatever.
Possibly. I can give it a shot if you want, but if you want to move on, that's fine too.
Yeah. But anyway, if you're interested in this stuff and you end up getting to the point where you're like, I want to export stuff to Blender, and you're finding that you're using Houdini for stuff, at that point you might want to consider paying the $200 a year or whatever it is,
which is not that much if you break it down per month, and you're also making money from it.
I mean, especially like it's just like a fancy. You can treat it as a fancy Blender add-on, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I don't know. This is a bunch of fun, random stuff in here.
It's already really similar. Yeah, it's already really similar to like a Geometry Nodes workball.
Yeah. I think already
more robust.
I think already you could probably figure out how to do a lot of really cool stuff in here.
Totally.
I think it's a little bit easier than Geometry Nodes in certain ways. Like obviously, if you're already used to Blender and you're in Blender, it's probably going to be easier to learn, Geometry Nodes.
Yeah.
But I think like Geometry Nodes, from what I've seen, it's a little bit more like granular level stuff.
Like
and
the mountain node is like, it looks like in Geometry Nodes that would be like a node group that just comes built in already, kind of like how if anybody's used like the new hair Geometry Nodes, those are basically all just like node groups. It's as if Houdini has like a bunch of those already packed in, so you don't have to do everything one little node at a time. It's
interesting because a lot of the nodes in Houdini are actually made up of other nodes. So there's these thing called HDAs.
Okay.
So if you double click
just
on
like
it,
a group, basically.
You can go in and see. Yeah, exactly. You can just see what it's made of. And so
that's probably a good way to learn really too.
Good. It is. It is definitely to see how these nodes are working. You can break stuff down and it's really cool that this program is that level of just like everything is made with nodes. Everything is, you can break apart everything. Like you can go into, the Vellum solver, for example, and see exactly kind of all the nodes that they're like building everything out of, and like break it apart or take parts out of it or tweak parts and like see like, if we go into, I think, the Vellum solver inside that, you can see like, this is all the stuff that it's made of.
Yeah.
This is the dynamics context, which works differently from the SOP context. It's for like sims and stuff. And then what this Vellum solver node is, it's basically a wrapper around all that stuff. So you don't really have to worry as much about the complexities of DOPS or the dynamics context. And like, this level of like high level node, like the Vellum solver, is like probably not one that you would see in Geometry Nodes, where it's like, here's one node that does, like Softbody simulations or whatever.
Not yet anyway.
There's also, if we go over here, and I'm just going to save this file really quick, just so we don't lose anything in case. But if I go over here, I'm going to type in configure. There's a lot of these different configure setups that are like sets of different nodes together. So like, if you're like curious, like, I would love to quickly set up like a pyro.
I see some in there, like explosion.
There's one that's called billowy smoke. That's a good one. So if I go over here and I make that will create quickly
just like a smoke simulation.
A nice big kind of billowy smoke simulation here. that
The
you can
bounding
mess
box
with.
is like adaptive.
Yeah, the bounding box is adaptive. It's a sparse solver, which is nice. There's another solver that you can get that's super GPU based called, it's a plugin for Houdini called Axiom that's made by this guy who's like really. But yeah, so you can do this kind of stuff. You can also, if you really want to get into pyro sims, I would recommend checking out Axiom because it's like crazy fast. However, Side Effects has been also making this sort of like GPU version of the pyro solver called the minimal OpenCL version. So if I click that, we'll see if it works. And again, it should take a second to compile that kernel so it can do the first frame, and then it's going to be fast after that. But it should be a little bit more of like a real-time kind of pyro sim. And this one I think is not yet sparse, although hopefully it will be eventually if they update it, meaning that you need to have like a specific sort of like boundary that you're working with it inside of. This is going really slowly. What kind of GPU do you have, by the way?
I just got a 4090 a few months ago.
Yeah, 4090. I have the same one.
Nice.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I know your CPU is much beefier than mine.
Yeah.
Mine's like a few years old at this point. Damn, that looks really good already. Even though it's like low res, it's fast.
It's pretty low res, but it's really fast because it's using this minimal mode that has less features, but it runs on the GPU. I think we could maybe set the voxel size even smaller.
Right.
And I think also the other thing to keep in mind is that like if you're streaming with OBS or whatever, it's going to take a little bit of a hit on the GPU as well.
Definitely.
Anyway, you can quickly kind of configure these setups and play with it and be like, okay, instead of putting the torus in, like what if I put in, you know, what if I put in, like a rubber toy guy?
Or you could probably like solidify that or whatever, remesh it, make it like a...
Or what we could do is over here where we have this setup where we created this weird shape up here. What we could do is we could make a time shift. And then by default, it has this expression $F that is going to make it so that it's like reading the current frame that we're on.
In Blender, that would be like hash, the like pound sign frame. It's like the same thing.
Exactly. So I can change that. I can just say, let me just type in 138 in here instead.
So it's just like now it'll stuck be locked at 138.
Exactly. Okay. And then I can plug this into the remesh here instead, and then it will remesh this guy with triangles and stuff. Maybe this is going to be way too dense. This seems like this is going to be a pretty heavy simulation, but like also there's this annoying viewport bug in Houdini where I'm seeing this geometry that came from a different node, but it's not actually there.
Yeah, all right.
There's an annoying workaround for this. Is made easier if you install the labs tools. But if I close the scene view and make a new one,
that's funny.
What's it called? Viewers scene view.
Okay.
It'll get rid of that.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And if you install the labs tool, there's a lab menu up here that just has a reset viewport button that makes the whole thing easier. But one of these annoying little things with Houdini to be aware of, and I know that Side Effects is working on fixing that kind of stuff, but you know, I think, and it's important for them to fix that kind of stuff because otherwise, like new users will just get really confused and stuck until they learn about it.
At least the fix for that is literally just like refresh it, turn it off, and turn it on.
Yeah, exactly. Got to give a shout out also in the chat to Matt Estella, who is the creator of CG Wiki, which is like one of the best resources for learning Houdini. They have
what's up, Matt?
All kinds of GIFs and awesome stuff in there, HIP files that you can download and break apart that show like how to make cool effects and everything. But yeah, this is a really fun Houdini Blender crossover. All kinds of Blender and Houdini heads in the chat. Love to see it. Anyway, so yeah, now this is, I think, ready to sim, and it's probably going to be really slow because we have so many tetrahedrons here, which we could speed up significantly, although it's actually pretty fast despite that. But we could speed it up significantly if we did a lower res sim.
That's really cool,
so
though,
I'm going to go,
especially because it's like non-destructive. You can go back, change it. You don't have to like, convert it into a mesh and like lock it in place,
Totally. Yeah. So I'm gonna maybe go up here and set this to like a bigger number, like 0.1. This is going to be a lot easier to sim. So I'll have this transform node here, and I'll put this one back there. You can also use a switch node if you want to be like, I have multiple different setups and I want to like pick between the two. Yeah. Cool. So we can go ahead up here and wait for this, and then now this should sim like a lot faster. So I'm gonna get this really cool blobby simulation here that you could also export to Blender or whatever, if you could export to Limbix.
Yes.
In theory, you could export this as like a bone simulation, and there's a really awesome. Oh, what's up, Grayscale Gorilla in the chat? Hey guys, hey. I was talking about how I originally learned on C4D earlier, but those guys made like the best intro to C4D tutorials ever. That's like how I kind of started learning 3D. So big shout out to those guys. And it's cool that they've been getting into more both Houdini and Blender stuff and Unreal and all that stuff. They make a lot of really awesome assets and plugins and things like that.
Nice.
So yeah. Anyway, this is a really fun, like, disgusting guts simulation. I've totally breezed over like one of the first things that I usually show when I'm teaching somebody Houdini. So I think I'll quickly dive into that now.
Sure.
So I'm gonna make a rubber toy, and I'm going to do a scatter on there. And so if we scatter onto an object, we're just scattering points onto the surface of the object, and they're like nicely relaxed and spread apart and everything. And what we can do is since we have these points, we can use an awesome node called copy to points. This is like an instancer. You're probably familiar with this in whatever 3D program you're used to.
Yeah, instance on points and geometry nodes for people watching.
Yeah, or like the cloner in C4D or whatever. But so you say basically two inputs: the target points that you want to copy something to, and then the target geometry that you want to copy. So I'm going to make a box here.
So you're going to put like a bunch of cubes. Oh, okay. They're all rotated too.
And now they're all rotated based on the normals.
Yeah, sick.
And if you middle click on a node, you can see what attributes it has. So you can see on this node, we have the points position attribute. We have a normal attribute, and we have the UVs, right? Yeah. Which are all inherited from this object here.
All right.
It has a point, a normal, and then it has a primitive attribute called the shot material path, which is like the material, and then a vertex attribute, which is the UVs.
Yeah.
On a scatter, we don't have X's anymore. We have points. Points and vertexes or vertices are different things in Houdini.
Yeah, it's different too.
Yeah, so I don't know. Tell me if it's like this in Blender, but basically the idea is that there's 4 vertices here, one for each polygon.
Okay, yeah, like face corners.
Point. Yes, exactly. They're like face corners. Exactly. Gotcha. So that's what a vertex is in Houdini.
All right.
Whereas a point is more optimized because it's like there's a lot less of those because there's just one per like point, right? So we can scatter over here, and you can even see like how much storage the file is going to take up here if you were to save this to disk or whatever. Really handy. And so it's going to orient it based on those attributes. I could use an attribute delete if I wanted to, and like delete that normal attribute, and then they won't be oriented. They'll just be like that. And I can change the number of points that it's going to scatter. And all this stuff. So that's kind of cool. I can choose the size that I want of the box here.
You can probably randomize that too, right?
You can randomize it because you can create an attribute that will also get read into the copy to points here, where if I do an attribute randomize, so it'll make a color attribute. That's one kind that you can randomize.
Yeah.
But another one that you can randomize is the one you were just hinting at, which is called P scale or point scale. So it's a float value that's just like 0 to whatever, saying kind of like what the scale of the thing should be. So I can make it so it's like 0 to 5. This only needs to be a one-dimensional thing here, but it's like, the max and min values.
So
and I can tweak the max and min values of the color.
Is the name of the attribute that you're using.
Yes.
Okay. And that's what the node is doing. It's like making an attribute.
Yeah, it's just making the attribute that lives on the points. Yeah. And then those are being inherited by the copy to points, which is really, really handy. I'll point out here that I could use like a mountain node or whatever on here. And like distort all these points and stuff. And you'll see the boxes get all distorted.
Yeah. So it's not like instanced at that point. It's like already realized afterward. Okay.
Exactly. It's not instanced. If you want to instance it, you use this pack and instance button on the copy to points.
Okay.
And now if you do this, like, it's actually not going to do anything because it needs to like have a normal to move it on. But
so we like pushed it in the position maybe instead of the.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I'll just turn off this on the mountain node. There's this noise along vector that I can uncheck, and now it's like a zero-centered world space noise. Cool. That again, we can turn on or off instancing and kind of see what that does. Also, if we're using the instancing, I mean, I can use a way more complex piece of geometry. So I could use like a pig head and then plug that into here, and like it's too big actually. So I'll make the pig head a lot smaller, or I can change the P scale, but I'll just make it smaller over here. And then we have all these different instance pig heads with all these different colors that are randomized.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah, happy Halloween. And I just turned the shadows back on for fun here to make it even more spooky.
Sam in the chat is asking how you would change the minimum and maximum scale, like for the randomized. Is there a way to like set a minimum and maximum?
Yeah. So
is that more in depth?
Min and max scale based on position. So like, so I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you could drive the scale based on the position.
Okay. I already see like up there. I just saw like a min and max field. Yeah, min
so
value.
There's min and max on here, but this is just random, right?
Oh yeah, okay.
If you wanted to drive it based on position, and we should get to the thing that Matt's talking about in there afterwards. But there's two ways you can do it. There's these two things in here. One is called Vex, and the other one's called VATA. Okay. So if I do a point wrangle, this lets me write a little snippet of code where I can say like the attribute P scale, I'm going to multiply it by at P.Y. So the position, the Y value, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So now it's going to.
So that's the workspace. You can see like at the 0 point, it's like scaling down to 0.
Exactly. And then, so what I could do is I could put a transform like right before here.
And then you're like kind of changing the world.
Move it up and down.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
And it'll, all move based on that. But the other thing you could use is if you're not comfortable with code, you could use a point VOP instead.
All right.
And this is the exact same thing as using Vex. It's just using nodes instead.
Oh,
so I can say,
all right,
cool, I have the position. I want to like,
that's awesome.
Maybe like split. No, I want to vector. I never use this, so I may fumble this a little bit, but vector to float. So that'll take the XYZ over here. And this is a little bit more geometry nodes. Like this is kind of what I was talking about, where it's like geometry nodes is a little bit more granular.
Yeah.
This is really granular level tweaking stuff with nodes.
That's cool that you have the option though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we have the P scale, which isn't one of the ones that it comes with over here. So I have to bind the P scale up here. So I'll just type in P scale there, and now that's bound. And then I can multiply that by the Y position over here. And then I can plug this in to a bind export, and then I'll call this P scale again. Okay. So it's driving the P scale here, and this is literally doing exactly the same thing.
That's interesting.
Just with VOPs instead of with Vex.
Yeah.
But with Vex is a little bit easier. Yeah. And I highly recommend, if you want to learn Vex, which is one of the best ways to learn like the granular levels of how Houdini works and stuff. And there's also probably ways to do this, by the way, that are like even simpler than, because again, they're making more of this stuff like higher level tools and stuff. Like there's probably like an attribute like remap node where I could be like, I don't know, maybe take like the P scale and like multiply it by.
Okay, so you have like a ramp.
I don't know, like another attribute or something. I don't know how to use this because again, I'm used to using Vex,
but there are options,
which is one of the tricky things with Houdini.
That's what you're saying.
There are definitely options. Yeah. There's a lot of cool ways to do stuff, and
Vex
if you want to learn
seem
Vex,
too complicated. I can already tell like some of the syntax stuff just based on what you've been typing. Like attributes are with like the at sign or something.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, they're really not. It's really not. And I was totally not like a code guy at all. And then there's this little online course that Matt Estella, shout out again in the chat, from CG Wiki made, called Joy of Vex. So if you look up Joy of Vex, or maybe like Joy of Vex Houdini, you'll find this really awesome resource that Matt made. That's like basically you can do a little lesson every day and it will teach you this. And it basically made me not afraid of getting into doing code stuff anymore.
I'll check that.
So cool stuff. Anyway, let's go back to this for a second. And then Matt was saying might be worth showing that you can swap the rubber toy for Joey's animation. So maybe we should bring in that animation.
Okay.
Let's grab that real quick. So we have an FBX that Joey exported. I'll call it FBX character import. And I'll grab.
So is that like assuming that it's going to have an armature?
It's assuming that it's going to have bones and everything. Okay. Yeah, exactly. If you're just importing a piece of Geo as an FBX, you don't need to do that.
Okay.
You can just do a FBX import, FBX skin import, I believe, and it will just import the skin.
Okay. Cool.
But what this does is, if you bring this in, I'll make a null here so we can see it. there's the geo here, right? Which is just like your geometry. There's the capture pose. So this is like the rest bind position. And then there's the animation, which I don't think you have any animation on here. So it's not going to come in. But if you did have animation, it would come on here.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then you can do a bone deform to deform it. Now, one thing is your character's really dark. I think if we put what we found before when we were playing before the stream was that if we put a color node on it and give it like a white base color, then all the materials come through like correctly from Blender.
Yeah.
And then what we were doing was playing with a rig noise, which is a little node that I made using just a few other nodes, like relatively simple. If you dive in, there's a couple
this is so cool. So it's basically just like adding noise to change the rotation of each of the bones. So it's really cool.
And there's rotation and position changing. So you can change the position like that, or have it not do that at all, or you can have it so it's really crazy, like rotating it and you can change the amplitude of it kind of breaks it. Yeah. And there's probably like I could be doing a better job, I think. But it's really fun to mess with this stuff. I'm gonna set this back like this, and you can change the frequency if you want it to be like really noisy like that.
Yeah.
I was also showing.
Oh yeah.
Well, I was gonna say I was also showing before that if you wanted to, you could also use like something like a rig pose, and then you can like additively add onto the animation. So like I can be like, cool, let me rotate this arm down like this and the bicep down like that, and pose your character a little bit, and then we have still it's adding that noise, and then it's doing the rig pose, and we could even turn the noise off. We could also, there's a lot of other stuff we could do. Were you gonna say something?
I don't remember. I'll bring it up if it's important, if I remember.
Cool. Well, what Matt was trying to say before was I should probably use a transform to make this smaller, like make it maybe 0.1 or something like that.
Oh my God.
But yeah, this is to show that like everything in Houdini is always like live. It's not like anything is getting baked down at any point. That's again, one of the really amazing ideas with Houdini is it's like everything stays very procedural and like, you have all this really cool sort of like liveness to your setups, which can occasionally result in like slower performance than if you choose to like bake things down in certain places. And you can bake things down, and there's a lot of different ways to do that and ways to optimize setups and things like that. But it's also really cool when you want to have something live, and if you want to build a setup that's like a procedural, donut maker, you can make like a thing that will turn anything into a donut, for example. And there's a cool tutorial from this guy Lewis Orton in Houdini for how to do donut in any shape is what it's called if you Google it.
That's funny.
So anyway, yeah, that's cool. But let's go back to the example of the box over here real quick, just so that I can round out my classic sort of like intro to Houdini lesson that I like to show people. So we have the scatter and all this stuff. We also, it's a scatter to points. So it's scattering to those points, but there are points. You can see there's 12,000 points on the rubber toy itself, and you can just scatter directly onto those points. You don't need to just have pure points to scatter on, right?
That makes sense.
So it's just points. So much in Houdini is just like points and point attributes and doing stuff with points. But yeah, so you have that. Another cool node though is this one that's called points from volume. And this is kind of the point cloud thing that you were hinting at before, where it's like
Blender has a similar thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just creating a point cloud inside the volume of the thing.
Right.
So
you could use that as like a different way of voxelizing something.
Totally. Yeah. We're basically building our own voxelizer tool here. So like if you plug that in there, I set the separation to 0.05, plug that in there. Now this looks like really close to like, Minecraft version of our guy. If you go to the box, you can see, okay, the scale here is also 0.05. I can make it smaller, but the annoying thing is like, well, I want to figure out how to make it so that
it adapts.
Like it's always the right size. It always adapts, right? And what we're noticing is that if I change the scale of this to make it kind of fit to it and adapt it, it's like, it's the point separation value is actually kind of the same as the uniform scale value.
Guess how Houdini does it? Okay, so is the point separation value, can you just use that as an attribute? Is that an attribute that exists?
Great guess, but not quite. So it's going to be even easier than than that.
Oh, okay.
So if we go to the point separation, right click and just say copy parameter, it's basically, I think it's the same as what Blender does too. It's like you right click here and you just say paste relative references.
Okay.
And now it's
cool.
looking at, okay.
It's
we
like
have
a
this
driver
node.
in Blender, kind of.
Exactly like a driver in Blender or in Maya. I think it's the same thing. And if you go to this uniform scale over here, it's basically saying grab from like the node that we're in, like right outside of that / points from volume. Right. That's the name of this node. And then / the parameter on it is grabbing from is particle separation. And so now if we tweak this,
that's like a relative file path. So if you threw a different node in between, would it break it?
It would break it if we were to say, like I were to take this and go to a different area, like I'm in a new thing over here.
Okay, gotcha.
Now it doesn't know where to grab this from because there's no node next to it called points from volume. But if I made a points from volume one, now it's happy. It sees, there's a value in here that's whatever, right? But if you wanted an absolute path instead, you could absolutely...
So just like right click absolute path or something?
So I don't think there is a right click absolute path, but there is, some people have made some like plugins and stuff or Python setups that you can like include where, like, so I have one of those in my thing, but if you want to know how to construct the correct absolute path, basically where we are is we're at obj / sphere one / points from volume one. So I could just change this to say /obj / sphere one points from volume one particle sep. And now if I copy this and go into here, now this isn't going to be upset because it knows exactly what that absolute path is to the thing. Right. Interesting. Useful to know. Usually you want to use the relative paths anyway.
It seems easier.
Yeah. But sometimes you want to have that absolute path. So cool. And then now, you think about order of operations and stuff. I mean, I can make a transform node here and animate our guy moving, and you can see it's kind of moving through the voxels. Or, I could put the transform node here and then be rotating this before it copies to the point. So it still is going to copy them all in that direction.
That's cool. But they're not arranging, like they're not rotating. Yeah.
Exactly. Or, I can obviously transform after here and then, so there's like order of operations is important, it is in most programs, but there's our voxelized guy. And then, on top of that, I could do like, we could do, instead of doing the points from volume, if we wanted points that way, I could like, I'll show like one more thing, I think. So I'll take this test geometry here and I can add keyframes to any channel in Houdini.
Okay.
By like doing alt click on the channel.
Alt click. All right.
So I'll do that and then I'll move this guy up here. And it's not set to auto key. So it's not going to automatically create a key unless I do that or I hit K. But I'll turn on auto key changes and then I'll go over here and then move that there.
Neat.
I'll go over here. Move that there. Another cool thing is as they've been trying to make Houdini better for animation, they've added this cool animation toolbar here.
Interesting.
And one of the things that I really like to use in this is this feature called blend to neighbor. So it's like blend to the nearest frame.
Interesting.
So I can like kind of force an ease by adding a keyframe there like that.
Yeah. Blender has a similar thing to that. I forget what it's called. I think it is just ease in the pose mode. It's like Shift E or Control E or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And just all of these in here are handy and there's documentation on how they all work and stuff. But the one that I mainly use is this blend to neighbor one just for doing the easing kind of stuff.
Time offset. Cool. That seems interesting. Probably a little off course, but
I don't know exactly how it works, to be honest. I got to read the docs on this stuff again. Yeah. But this stuff is like definitely stuff that like a character animator really
seems like it
wants. And I think like it's similar to like in Maya, the character animators will usually use this thing called tween machine or something like that. I think it's got some of the same kind of features as sort of the idea. I mean, their Side Effects is definitely trying to make Houdini a package that can compete with Maya when it comes to like character animation and stuff in big studios. But so I have this animation on here now. Now I'm going to show another cool node is this one that's called trail. So by default, what this will do is it will create like a trail.
That's awesome.
And it will just create like one copy in time. I can make the trail length longer and it will create a bunch of copies then. I can change the trail increment. So now it's like creating kind of like smear frames.
This is like the thing that you're doing with the Larry animation, right?
Kind of.
Is that a different thing?
I have done that for Larry stuff before. What I'm doing with the Larry stuff is making like a fluid simulation where it's like emitting every frame.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, lots of different ways you could achieve this kind of effect. This is a really cheap and fun and easy one.
Yeah, that's cool.
There's these different modes on here too. There's this preserve original, connect as mesh, connect as polygon, so it'll make these cool weird trails here that could be useful for something. But there's also compute velocity, which is the one that I'm usually using.
Okay, and is that like storing it on the points?
Exactly.
Okay,
velocity attribute, right? So we have this velocity attribute every frame.
So you can use that for smearing.
You can use it for smearing for sure.
Yeah.
There's really cool tutorials on how to do that. You know, I could go into a point wrangle here and I could say at P plus equals the velocity.
Okay.
And now it's going to like, you know, do some weird shit based on that. I could have it be just using like a smaller amount of that. Like if I have it multiplied by velocity times 0.1 or whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. There's other fancy stuff you can do with like dot products and normals and the velocity and like make it so that like it only smears if it's moving in the opposite, or if it's moving in the opposite direction of the normal or whatever.
That makes sense.
So it like makes a nice looking smear frame type thing.
Yeah, like it'll only smear on like the back part or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a cool tutorial that friend who's really good at Houdini, also Mark Fancher, made that I would recommend checking out, where he shows how to do that with like a guy with a sword. But if we make another cool thing about velocity is it'll get inherited in simulation. So if I make a pop network, oh Jesus, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to open those things up. I press P to bring up the parameters window by accident, and then O to bring up this network overview.
Minimap.
But if I go over here and I type in pop network, it'll make a DOP network kind of pre-configured to do like a particle simulation or a pop simulation. It's inheriting this weird material issue, which is like why it's looking like these weird spheres on here. So I'm going to do an attribute delete. Anytime things are weird in Houdini, you can like look at the attributes that are on the thing and see if that's causing things to be weird. But yeah, so I'm going to delete that shop material path attribute. And then I have now this particle sim where the velocity is influencing the particles as they're being created.
That's cool.
Right?
Yeah.
And then from there, I can also, again, plug that into the copy to points also. And now
it's a bunch of cubes. Yeah.
All these cubes flying around. Yeah. I could also do something like, say, like in a point wrangle, I could say like P scale equals the length of the velocity vector. And then, you know, you'll see they get bigger as it moves.
Yeah. Right? So like the faster it moves, kind of, the higher the velocity. The bigger they get.
The bigger they get. Yeah. So that's kind of cool. I could also, in here, I can go in and like, now we're in this different context again that works differently. So like it's not SOPs anymore. So it's a little bit confusing and it will take some kind of getting used to. But to keep it simple with pops, if you want to like add particle forces and things like that, you just press tab in here and you type in pop and you get all these different nodes that aren't available in SOPs. These are all DOP nodes specifically. And I'll say like pop drag, I'll do that.
So that's like
I just added
wind resistance or something?
Exactly. So I'll just add it into this chain and it will sort of like dampen the movement as it happens.
It's like underwater.
Yeah. Or there's just like, or it's really big and the wind, you know, is affecting it a lot or whatever.
Right.
But maybe I don't need to multiply this by 0.1 anymore. I can just,
But
you get a cool little,
that's cool
little setup like that.
Yeah.
You know, and there's so much more cool stuff that you can obviously do in Houdini, but this is just, I think, a good general sort of overview of like a bunch of fun stuff that can be done. I don't know if you have any other like specific things that you're curious about or that you want to go over. And I know I just kind of drove the whole time and didn't let you actually do anything.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot though. I guess like a lot of mostly like in this area, this whatever you call it, the node area, that's what we focused on the most. I don't really know about a lot of these things on the side, like the tools and stuff, but they all have tool tips, so it seems pretty straightforward.
I'll say really quick on that. So first of all, these shelves up here, there's a lot of like default setups for like how you can have like a pyro, billowy smoke, all this kind of stuff. But I would say you mostly should just ignore these now. Like I rarely ever use any of this stuff. It's all just like kind of like handy preset stuff. But they kind of made better presets now that you can just access in here
Gotcha.
when you type in configure or whatever. The tools on the left over here, there's your classic like rotate, transform, all this stuff. The main one that you're going to be using though is just this show handle tool, which will give you like the sort of context specific, controls based on whatever node
you have
you're selecting.
Yeah. I noticed that when you had like the transform node, it like let you select the node and then drag it in the viewport, which is neat. Yeah.
Matt says that I should do this where we make cube Joey over here, which is pretty fun. But yeah, all this stuff, it can all be reconfigured kind of like however you want. Yeah, but the only other one that's useful is like the select up here where you can like, select stuff. If it's instances, it'll select it per box. I can go in here and then just hit delete and it will make a blast node that will delete all of these.
Yeah, that's crazy that it can like actually
so you can
recognize them in space and do that. That's awesome.
You get different tools in the viewport in Houdini. So if you press tab in here, it'll give you some different stuff and it will kind of create nodes automatically.
Yeah. Okay.
Based on that. But like, the main one that I use all the time is like select a bunch of crap, hit delete, and then it'll delete it, and it's deleting them based on their like numbers. So this is not a very procedural setup.
Yeah,
like if
it's all like
if you were
the
to change
index
the
value.
Exactly. But you could instead select things using like different attributes, like a name attribute or groups or like things like that.
Or do some sort of like SDF stuff where there's like a cube parented to one of the bones and it's being used to delete a bunch of points or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it's always better to do things procedurally, and there are more and less procedural ways you can do things. Like a less procedural way you could do some stuff in Houdini is definitely using a node like if I make like a I don't know, if I go, let me go over to your Joey again, and I'll do like a VDB from polygons here, and I will convert VDB back to polygons, and then I'll do like a attribute paint.
Okay.
You can paint like a mask or whatever that you can use as an attribute
like
to drive certain things. Yeah, exactly. Or just like vertex painting for whatever, And so now I have that mask attribute, but if I make any kind of tweak, like if I do like a VDB smooth, for example, in the middle here, it's going to change the polygon count here. And then this mask is going to be all pushed out as you would expect.
Yeah.
However, there is this handy recache feature. So it will recache the strokes and then it will fix it. Okay. But it's just like, it's a little bit less procedural. Yeah. There's also like a sculpt node where you can just like sculpt on stuff if this even works. Yeah, there it is. This is a pretty new one that they just reworked.
I saw that the other day in a video where someone was making like custom smear frames with the sculpt tool.
Oh yeah. Max Rose video. Yeah. He's doing some pretty cool stuff with rigging, especially. He's getting really hardcore about it. But yeah, so I can make these tweaks, and then again, I can like, if I turn off VDB smooth, I think it actually stashed that old version inside here. It's different from the edit stash. It will no longer update is the error it gives. So that's a nice, so I can reset sculpt maybe, and then I can resculpt myself. But it's like, there's like inherently more and less procedural ways to do things.
That makes sense
in Houdini. But it's pretty fun. Though I think actually, let me show one more really quick example, which is, if I remesh this guy over here, and I'll set the topology to be like dense enough for what we want, I'll do a tetrahedral softbody sim on Joey again, and then I will go back to frame 1, and I'll do a Vellum solver to do the whole simulation with tetrahedral Joey, and then hit play. Actually, wait, we want to turn on the ground plane so that he kind of flops to the ground like that.
Yeah. Oh no, my eyebrows.
So the eyebrows just completely fall off.
I love that.
Gotta attach them somehow or something. But yeah, that's pretty fun. But it's like, this is cool, but now it's just using this fucked up version of Joey. So like, what if we want to do this to the original mesh? And you can actually super easily.
Yeah, you just
there's a really like cool node.
Yeah, what is it?
Yeah, you're using, so it's a node called point deform.
Okay.
Where you're saying basically, give me the mesh that we're going to deform as the first input. So that's going to be the original Joey mesh. Give me the rest point lattice. So basically the mesh from the sim before we sim it. So the stuff coming from the tech conform here. And then give me the deformed point lattice. And so that's going to be the one from outside of the sim. Okay. And then now
So it's like
Now
work
it
like a
works.
lattice deformer.
Kind of. Yeah. And certain things are kind of breaking here a bit.
I think it's probably the glasses because they're like very low poly.
Yeah, it's the glasses are very low poly. We could subdivide them to help. There's also different settings, like, so it's basically on here, you can see there's this radius. It's like grabbing near points based on a radius of like a maximum of 0.1 units. We could set this to be smaller if we wanted, and it might help. You know, we could also say you can only use a maximum of like 10 points or something. And also you can do stuff like, there's like a Delta Mush node. I don't know if you're familiar with Delta Mush, but it's really handy.
I saw you showed me at one point what you were doing with the like lip syncing type stuff. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just a handy way to clean up sort of like fucked up deformations. I have a feeling also, I see if I middle click on here, there's some packed geometries. Maybe those are the eyes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But like if I just say unpack before we go over here, it might fix this whole situation. So unpack it, and then we have only polygons now. And then, now the eyes are going to be behaving a lot better. And you get this cool collapsing Joey.
With like the topology intact.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's sick.
So yeah, pretty fun stuff. There's a bunch of questions in the chat. Maybe we should answer some of them.
Yeah. I saw somebody ask about rigid body dynamics. Is that something that's easy to do?
Yeah. So I wonder if there's like a nice, I'm not like an expert at that, but there's a RBD. Yeah. So I could take like, let's use Joey again, just for fun. This might not be a great piece of geo to do an RBD sim on, but we'll try anyway. And what I'll do is I'll do a points from volume, right?
Okay.
And we can jitter them so that they're a little bit more random. And we can do a Voronoi fracture.
Cool.
And so that requires the geometry that you want to fracture and then the points for the Voronoi cells.
Oh, sweet. Yeah.
So now it's fracturing all your geo. And you can see it better if we do a exploded view.
Yeah. So it's actually separating each piece and it's being fractured at the points that you distributed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's creating these like constraints on the second input also. I think there's a RBD configure node that I may be supposed to plug this into. I really haven't used this stuff in quite a while. But okay, it looks like this is like packing everything nicely for us. And then there's a RBD bullet solver that I can plug this stuff into. So plug that in there, plug that. This is the proxy geometry, I guess. And then I don't know if I actually wanted to use the proxy geometry, but it looks like that's maybe the same thing anyway as what we have there. But if we do that and we maybe turn on there's like probably a ground plane on here, ground type, ground plane. Yeah. I hit play. Now we get fractured Joey.
Yeah, that's super fast too. It looks pretty stable.
Yeah, I mean it's a very simple RBD sim without like a lot of pieces or anything, but it does work. There's also a retime node, which is kind of cool, which you could use if you wanted to like have it go into slow motion or something. Yeah, exactly. So I could be like, okay, the input frame range is going to be 100, and then I'm gonna maybe go from speed 1, and we'll like ramp it down here to like speed 0.1 or something.
Okay, so slow down once it gets to that frame.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Hell yeah.
Whoa.
And it'll like interpolate linearly, but you could try these other interpolation methods if you're like want it to look nicer. But that works pretty well. Surprisingly. I wish the constraints were working better. Like, I don't know how to make those function properly. There's probably something with...
Yeah, there's a lot of options.
These glue constraints maybe, like...
So would this, like, hold them together or something?
You want these constraints that are going to kind of like somewhat hold stuff together.
I think
like, so this is using this glue, these pin glue constraints. Okay. Maybe we want these soft constraints instead.
So it's like the sort of thing maybe that like if you wanted like a bowling ball to like fly through my head, it would hold together until they get pushed a certain amount or something.
Exactly. You could definitely figure that kind of stuff out. This is kind of stuff where I don't do this stuff very often. Right. So I I always am trying to remember how all this stuff works whenever I do RBD sim. But yeah, you can certainly do RBD sims in Houdini. And
I'm getting crazy ideas with this now.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Okay. Yeah. What else should we address from the chat, if anything? Surprised how quickly we got through all that stuff. But also, again, I was just doing it instead of teaching it to you.
Oh yeah, like melting. It's a cool idea. Yeah, the thing that I was thinking when you were showing all of that is like maybe bringing over animation from Blender or something, and then doing like a fracture, but then having it so it's still animated until certain parts go fast enough, and then pieces start falling off or something like that. That seems like a thing you could do that. Yeah,
you could definitely do that. I know that there's also in the RBD bullet solver. So we have this one that's the RBD material fracture that I know is a little bit fancier and can be a lot slower to sim, but this might have more proper constraints set up and stuff. Yeah, so it looks like this maybe the glue constraints are kind of helping hold stuff together here now. But yeah, this is a way to do much more like physically realistic looking fractures. I just usually find that when I'm trying to use it, it's very slow because it can be tricky for it to figure out how to fracture all this stuff.
Right.
But yeah, the constraints, it's making glue constraints. The primary strength is set up really high. Maybe if I lower that. Yeah. Okay. So the glue constraints are working now. So yeah, we can tweak the strength of the glue.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Now it's not going to really break until his head like falls down like funny. That. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. And you could change how much it's fracturing by like maybe increasing the scatter points here or something like that. But again, this is kind of slow. You can see this past 190 of whatever, and then hit play here. Yeah, interesting. I don't know. Like, there's so much more detail you can get into with this stuff, and it's a whole sort of like area of specialty on its own. But it's definitely cool, and there's cool stuff you can do with it. There's also this enable guides feature, though. I know, where I believe what you can do is if you have like animation, it will like sort of follow along with the animation.
Okay.
So we can maybe test that out by, I'll do like a bend node here. And I think you're supposed to do it on the proxy geometry that it's going to read so I'll do a twist, and I'll make it so that it's twisting our Joey. And you can use this handle to twist it if we wanted. But there's some where I guess it's on here. Yeah, is where we're supposed to twist
so you can like animate that or something.
Yeah, so I'll keyframe that, and then I'll keyframe it like over here like that, and like we'll see if that works. Doesn't seem like it's twisting. Doesn't seem like it. Maybe I'm supposed to do it on not the guides. Maybe I'm supposed to do it on the actual geo here. Or maybe I'm supposed to have the stuff be packed first. Does it look like he's going to twist?
I don't think so.
Maybe not.
But it's just a matter of like finding the right place to put it.
Oh, it says the guide method is velocity. So maybe it probably needs to have velocity on it, actually. So we don't have a velocity attribute on this just from using the bend. But if I use a trail node again and calculate that velocity, then maybe this will work. Try one more time. Yeah, I don't think this is working. And I have no idea how to make this work. This is not at all my area of expertise, but it's pretty cool that
it seems like something you can do though. Yeah.
I was going to say, like some of the stuff that I really love doing, like fluid simulations, like flip fluid simulations. I have some tutorials for that on my YouTube and stuff also. And we could certainly get into that stuff like another time also. But I'm really curious, like, if you start messing with Houdini, like what kind of stuff you figure out. And I don't know, maybe if you learn some more over the month or whatever, we could do like another stream and get more in depth with some other specific things. Would be super fun.
Yeah, I think a thing that I'd like to do, I'm not, for people in the chat, I'm not committed to doing this yet. I didn't plan it properly. I like the idea of coming up with some ideas of, projects that I can complete or try to complete by the end of the month, and then kind of work towards those. Like if I wanted to do more, bringing test animations over and then doing fun things to them, and then potentially even bringing them back into Blender and just kind of getting used to the process of bringing things back and forth. I think that could be interesting. Yeah, and then have like another of like, this is what I've learned type thing.
I think that'd be super sick. Yeah, I really want to see you dig into this stuff.
But no pressure, no pressure. But I'm always here to answer questions and help you figure stuff out.
Right on. How do you feel about wrapping it up? Do you feel like we're at a good stopping point?
I think this is a good stopping point.
Okay, cool.
Unless you have any other things you wanna look into for the time being. But I feel like we covered so much stuff.
Yeah, probably. I feel like that's enough for now. I'm definitely down to do another stream or video at some point. But I guess make sure to check out Chris Rutledge on, he has a YouTube channel where you can find some Houdini stuff, as well as, like I said, Patreon. And, you know, his link is down in the description, so you can find all of his stuff there. He does some really cool floppy character stuff, like you can see, you know, on the screen over here. Except like much more polished compared to this. Obviously,
you can polish it, just add more subdivs and now it's polished.
Yeah, throw a hit render, add a light to it, make it slimy. But yeah, is there a way that I can share this file with people if they wanted to like open it up?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you, I'll throw that on Patreon at like the lowest tier level for anybody who wants to download this as like a a test.
What we should do is I'll show you really quick if you want to save a file without having to worry about any like dependencies and stuff. So you don't want to have to include this FBX.
Pack it in.
Yeah, you can pack it in a couple ways. So there's this freeze button here that I believe will work, or this lock button, which I believe will like lock this into the file. But what I like to do more instead is there's a node called the stash node.
Okay, yeah.
And you can use this anywhere in Houdini and it will just stash the geometry into the file itself.
Okay, cool.
Which is really handy. It's like a quick way to cache stuff. Although what you have to be worried about is it will make your files bloated if you are like stashing tons of stuff in them.
Yeah,
but
makes sense.
So I've just stashed these 3 outputs here, so we'll have them now.
Cool.
But if you stash stuff in here and then you're like, I don't want this to be like stuck in the file, you can say move stash to new file and it will move it to like a sidecar file, which makes it a lot easier if you're saving lots of versions or whatever and you don't want like every version to be 100 megabytes because you just have your rig in there or whatever. You know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
cool. Well, yeah, if anybody wants that, I'll share it on the lowest tier on Patreon. And if you want all of the other project files from my videos, that's also the lowest tier on Patreon. And I'm also doing extra videos and behind the scenes content for the second tier and up. So if you want some extra videos, go check that out. Go check out Chris Rutledge on all of the platforms and whatnot as well. Also,
the one other thing.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. The one last thing that I'll plug is if you want to learn Houdini, I made a resource for that called simply HoudiniNerd.com. And we have like a Discord in there. So it's like handy for, it's both all the best sort of like tutorials that I like to recommend people, as well as a Discord where you can come and ask Houdini specific questions and stuff. But also if people have questions for me in the Joey Discord, I'll also answer them there as well. So
yeah, I'll be on the Houdini Nerd Discord. I just joined today. And like Chris said, I do have a Discord server for anybody who is watching and doesn't know about that. If you want to just like hang out with like-minded people or, ask questions and, it's a lot better than commenting on YouTube because you can actually share images and screenshots and whatever. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Thank you, Chris, for joining and teaching us a whole bunch.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yeah. And all right, I'll stop taking control of your screen now.
All right, sick. All right, thanks everybody for watching. Have a good one. Logging out.